They handcuffed a Black SEAL sniper in the courtroom. Then a four-star general walked in, and everyone froze. "Are handcuffs really necessary, officer?" Alexis Washington asked with a calmness that made the deputy hesitate for a moment. Her small, delicate hands disappeared inside the cold metal, but her eyes maintained a serenity that was disconcerting for someone facing charges of illegal possession of weapons and resisting arrest. The Jefferson County Courthouse was packed that Tuesday in October. Alexis, only 28 years old, sat in the defendant's dock wearing the orange jumpsuit of the local prison, contrasting starkly with her upright, dignified posture. She never imagined that her weekend of target practice would end with her being treated like a domestic terrorist. The defendant was found in possession of military-grade precision equipment without proper documentation, announced prosecutor Daniel Hayes, a middle-aged white man who took pains to pronounce each word with exaggerated authority. A customized sniper rifle, special ammunition, camouflage gear. When questioned about its origin, Ms. Washington refused to cooperate and behaved suspiciously. In the audience, whispers of disapproval echoed among those present. "Another one trying to cause trouble," muttered a woman in the second row, loud enough for Alexis to hear. The public defender, Dr. Martinez, nervously leafed through his papers. He had known Alexis for only 2 hours, and she had refused to explain any details about her past or the origin of the equipment found. "Your Honor, my client is exercising her constitutional right to remain silent." "Right to remain silent?" Hayes replied sarcastically. "Or is she simply refusing to explain why an unemployed young woman possesses military equipment valued at over $50,000? Alexis remained motionless, but those who watched her closely would notice a peculiar gleam in her dark eyes. It wasn't fear, anger, or despair. It was the calculating patience of someone who had faced much more dangerous situations and knew exactly how to react at the right moment. Judge Richardson, a Vietnam War veteran, reviewed the documents with growing confusion. "Miss Washington, do you understand the seriousness of these charges? Illegal possession of military weapons can result in up to 15 years in federal prison." "I understand perfectly, Your Honor," Alexis replied, her clear, articulate voice surprising some of those present who had expected to hear slang or an accent typical of the inner city. In the front row, journalist Sarah Chun scribbled furiously. A young Black woman with military weapons was exactly the kind of controversial story that would sell newspapers and generate clicks. She could already imagine the sensational headlines. Hayes continued his attack. "Your Honor, Ms. Washington was found shooting on an abandoned property using equipment that not even our local police have. When approached, she demonstrated suspicious technical knowledge of weapons and military tactics. We request preventive detention until this situation is fully clarified." Alexis closed her eyes briefly, breathing in a controlled manner, using a technique that few civilians would know. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. It was a pattern taught in very specific training for situations where staying calm meant the difference between life and death. When she reopened her eyes, there was something different in her gaze, a silent determination that made even the prosecutor hesitate for a moment. Alexis Washington did not look like a frightened young woman facing justice. She looked like someone waiting patiently for the truth to come out. If this story of prejudice and mystery has touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what would happen in the next few minutes in that courtroom would completely change everyone's perception of who that handcuffed woman really was, and why certain people should never be underestimated just because of the color of their skin or their appearance. The bail hearing quickly turned into a public spectacle that Daniel Hayes knew how to exploit perfectly. In the 3 days since Alexis' arrest, he had given interviews to 4 local stations, always emphasizing the same points. Young Black woman, military weapon, suspicious behavior, possible connection to extremist groups. "Your Honor," Hayes continued, opening a folder filled with color photographs. "I would like to present the evidence that demonstrates the danger the defendant poses to our community." The images were striking. The custom-made sniper rifle, night vision equipment, special ammunition, and a tactical vest that Hayes was careful to refer to as war gear. What he carefully omitted was that everything was legally registered, just under a name that no one had yet been able to connect to Alexis Washington. "This is not sporting equipment," Hayes declared, holding up an enlarged photograph. "This is the weaponry used by military snipers in combat operations. The question we all must ask is, what does an unemployed young woman intend to do with this?" In the audience, the tension was palpable. Sarah Chun, the journalist, typed furiously on her tablet, already envisioning the headline that would generate thousands of views. Young black woman armed to the teeth, terrorizes quiet town. Dr. Martinez, the public defender, glanced desperately at Alexis, who remained motionless as a statue. In his 15-year career, he had never faced a case where the client refused to cooperate so completely. She did not deny the charges, offer alternative explanations, or show any emotion. "My client is exercising her constitutional right to remain silent," Martinez repeated, knowing that he sounded weaker and weaker in the face of Hayes' legal barrage. Right to remain silent. Hayes laughed derisively. Or perhaps the defendant is simply unable to explain her actions without incriminating herself further. Judge Richardson leafed through the documents with growing concern. The photographs were indeed impressive, and the defendant's lack of cooperation created an atmosphere of mystery that did not help her cause. "Ms. Washington, are you sure you don't want to make any statement about the origin of these items?" Alexis looked up at the judge, and for a moment, Richardson felt something strange. It wasn't defiance or disrespect. It was the absolute serenity of someone who had faced far more intimidating courts than this one. Situations where the consequences were measured in lives, not years in prison. "Not at this time, Your Honor," Alexis replied with a politeness that contrasted sharply with a narrative Hayes was trying to construct. Hayes saw the opportunity and pressed forward. "Your Honor, the defendant clearly has advanced military training, as demonstrated by her handling of the equipment when she was approached. We have asked her about possible military service, but she refuses to provide any documentation or enlistment records." In the second row, a war veteran named Robert Mills frowned. Something about Alexis's posture, the way she kept her shoulders square even in handcuffs, the way her eyes periodically scanned the room, it was all familiar to him. Very familiar. Furthermore, Hayes continued, his voice taking on a dramatic tone he knew worked with juries. "We have discovered that the defendant has no formal employment history in the last 5 years. No reported income, no fixed address, but access to military equipment valued at over $80,000. Where did that money come from?" The insinuation was clear and poisonous. Hayes was planting seeds of suspicion about drug trafficking, criminal activity, financing of extremist groups, any narrative that fit the profile he wanted to build. Alexis closed her eyes briefly, and anyone watching her closely would have noticed a specific breathing pattern. For seconds inhaling through her nose, for seconds holding, for seconds exhaling through her mouth. It was a technique taught at Fort Bragg to maintain control in situations of extreme stress, when the difference between calm and panic could determine the success of a mission. "Does the defense have anything to add?" asked the judge, clearly inclined to accept the prosecutor's argument. Dr. Martinez rose hesitantly. "Your Honor, my client has no criminal record, has never even been given a traffic ticket. There is not a single act of violence in his history." "To our knowledge," Hayes retorted immediately. "But a person who operates in the shadows, who refuses to explain her source of income or the purpose of possessing military-grade weaponry, clearly has secrets she cannot reveal in a court of law." In the audience, murmurs of approval echoed among some of those present. Hayes' narrative was convincing, especially to those who had never questioned their own prejudices. A young black woman with military equipment and mysterious behavior easily fit into the most primitive fears of a predominantly white community. Sarah Chun had already sent her first article to the editor. "Armed mystery. Young woman refuses to explain military arsenal in tense trial." Online views began to grow exponentially, especially after she strategically chose a photo where the handcuffs were most visible. But Robert Mills remained unsettled. There was something about the way Alexis held her head high. How her eyes never showed real fear, just a calculating patience he had seen only once before in his life. Among elite operators returning for missions that officially never happened. "Your Honor," Hayes prepared his final blow. "I request that bail be denied. This defendant poses a clear and present danger to our community. Her suspicious behavior, her refusal to cooperate, and the military nature of her weaponry suggest involvement in activities that go far beyond simple illegal possession of firearms." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Alexis adjusting her posture in the uncomfortable courtroom chairs. Even handcuffed, even wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, she radiated a dignity that made some of those present feel inexplicably uncomfortable, as if they were witnessing an injustice they couldn't name. What those people in the audience couldn't imagine was that every prejudiced word, Every poisonous insinuation was being recorded not only by the press cameras, but by a memory trained to remember details that could mean the difference between life and death on battlefields halfway around the world. And when the truth finally came out, every one of those moments of humiliation would be paid back with interest that no one was prepared to pay. Judge Richardson banged his gavel with unnecessary force. Bail denied. The defendant will remain in custody until trial. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, temporarily sealing Alexis Washington's fate. Hayes couldn't hide a smug smile. Over the next 2 days, he would give more interviews, turning the case into his personal political platform. Justice was served today, he declared to the cameras outside the courthouse. We will not allow dangerous elements to threaten our peaceful community. Sarah Chin typed furiously, already envisioning the headlines that would generate tens of thousands of clicks. Court denies bail for armed suspect and mystery continues. Who is Alexis Washington really? But Robert Mills remained in his seat even after the session ended, watching Alexis being escorted out. A veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan, he had spent enough time alongside elite operators to recognize certain signs. The way she maintained situational awareness even in handcuffs. The way her eyes periodically scanned the room. The way she breathed in a controlled manner. It all screamed specialized military training. "Excuse me." Mills approached Dr. Martinez in the hallway. "I'm Robert Mills, a war veteran. I need to talk to you about your client." Martinez, exhausted after 2 days of frustration, looked suspicious. "I can't discuss details of the case." "I'm not asking for details," Mills lowered his voice. "I'm offering information. Your client has advanced military training. Very advanced. And if I'm right about what I suspect, you're dealing with someone who operates at a level this court has never seen." Martinez hesitated. In 15 years on the job, he had learned to recognize when someone knew more than they let on. "What are you suggesting? That maybe we should find out why a trained operative chose to remain silent when a single phone call could resolve all of this." Meanwhile, at the county jail, Alexis maintained her routine with military precision. She woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, exercised in her cell using only her body weight, meditated for exactly 15 minutes, and spent the rest of the time observing the behavior patterns of the guards and other inmates. Detective Warren, one of the officers responsible for her initial arrest, noticed something disturbing during his rounds. "Man, it's weird," he commented to his partner. "Most inmates get agitated, complain, cause trouble. She's different. It's like she's waiting for something." On the second night, Alexis received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Martinez entered the visiting room accompanied by Robert Mills, who had insisted on joining the conversation. "Miss Washington," Martinez began hesitantly. "This is Robert Mills. He is a war veteran and believes he can help with your case." Alexis studied Mills for a long moment. Her eyes met his, and instantly something changed in the atmosphere of the room. It was as if 2 professionals recognized each other through an invisible code. "How long have you served?" Mills asked, his voice carrying a tone Martinez couldn't quite place. "Is that relevant?" Alexis replied, but her posture had shifted subtly. 11th Airborne, 2 tours in Afghanistan, Mills continued. "I've seen operators working alongside us. I recognize the signs." A heavy silence filled the room. Martinez felt like he was witnessing a coded conversation that was completely beyond his comprehension. "Mr. Mills," Alexis finally spoke. "There are certain situations where revealing information can do more harm than good. And there are certain situations where keeping quiet can jeopardize larger operations," Mills countered. Martinez interrupted, frustrated. "Can someone explain what you're talking about?" Alexis looked directly at Mills. "If you really served where you say you did, you know that some missions require maintaining cover even under pressure." Mills nodded slowly. "But I also know that there are protocols for compromised situations, appropriate channels that can be activated. And what if those channels are being tested?" Alexis asked, and for the first time, Mills detected something in her voice that made him completely reconsider the situation. The next morning, Hayes called a press conference. "After further investigation, we have discovered that the defendant has suspicious connections that extend beyond what we initially imagined," he announced dramatically. "We are cooperating with federal agencies to determine whether there is a larger network operating in our region." The insinuations were clear and poisonous. Hayes was planting seeds about domestic terrorism, extremist cells, threats to national security, any narrative that could turn the case into his political springboard. Sarah Chin posted immediately. Exclusive investigation reveals possible terrorist connections of armed suspect. The article spread across social media like wildfire, generating thousands of prejudiced comments and conspiracy theories. But Mills couldn't get his conversation with Alexis out of his head. That night, he did something he hadn't done in years. He called an old military contact. "Jake, it's me, Robert Mills. I need to check something." "No, I can't explain over the phone." "Do you still have access to the appropriate channels?" While Mills worked discreetly in the background, Alexis remained in her cell, maintaining a calm that intrigued even the most experienced guards. During recreation time, she watched every detail of the prison, memorizing layouts, routines, security protocols. "Planning an escape?" asked Lisa, a veteran inmate who occupied the cell next door, sarcastically. "No," Alexis replied with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm waiting." Waiting for what? The right moment. Dr. Martinez visited her again on the third night, this time alone and visibly agitated. "Alexis, Robert Mills has told me things that have changed my perspective on this entire case. He believes you're not who Hayes is painting you to be." Alexis kept her expression neutral. "And what does Mr. Mills think I am?" "He thinks you're someone who serves this country in a way most people will never know," Martinez said, choosing his words carefully. "And that perhaps this case is bigger than any of us realize." "Dr. Martinez," Alexis leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes the most dangerous people are those who underestimate who they're dealing with. And sometimes the best strategy is to let them continue underestimating until it's too late to correct the mistake." Martinez felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about patience," Alexis replied, his eyes shining with an intensity he had never seen before. "About knowing how to wait for the exact moment when all the elements align perfectly." That same night, Miles received a call that would keep him awake until dawn. "Robert, you need to stop asking questions about that woman." The voice on the other end was serious and concerned. "There are things in motion that go far beyond what you can imagine." "Jake, just confirm one thing for me. Is she who I think she is?" A long silence. "Robert, if you value your safety and hers, stop investigating. Trust me when I tell you that there are forces at work that make this case much more complex than it appears." As Hayes slept peacefully in his elegant home, planning his next media appearance, he couldn't have imagined that every prejudiced word, every poisonous insinuation, every moment of public humiliation he had inflicted was being carefully catalogued by a mind trained to operate in scenarios where failure means much more than personal defeat. What Hayes didn't know was that there is a fundamental difference between prey and a predator pretending to be prey. And when someone trained to eliminate threats to national security decides that you have become a threat to something much greater than your petty political ambitions, the only question left is whether you'll have enough time to realize your mistake before it's too late to ask for forgiveness. On the morning of the fourth day, Hayes called his most ambitious press conference yet. "I can confirm that our investigation has revealed troubling connections," he announced to an auditorium packed with journalists. "The defendant may be linked to terrorist financing networks operating through untraceable military equipment." Sarah Chun typed furiously, already envisioning the headlines that would break viewing records. Hayes smiled confidently, savoring every word he knew would propel him into state politics. "This is a matter of national security," Hayes continued dramatically. "We cannot allow radical elements." The sound of military helicopters cut off his speech. 2 Blackhawks landed in the courthouse parking lot, followed by a motorcade of official vehicles with Pentagon license plates. Hayes hesitated, confused, as soldiers in full dress uniform marched in perfect formation toward the building. As I was saying, he tried to resume, but his voice sounded less confident. Dr. Martinez received a call that would change everything. "Doctor, this is Colonel James from the Army General Counsel's office. I need you to keep your client exactly where she is. Do not sign any documents. Do not accept any transfers. A general is on his way." In the courtroom, Hayes was finishing his performance when the main doors burst open. General Patricia Morrison, 4 stars shining on her chest, entered followed by a team of senior officers. The silence was instant and absolute. "Where is Commander Washington?" Her voice echoed through the crowded room. Hayes paused. "Co-commander? I don't understand. We have a suspicion of terrorism." "Officer Hayes," General Morrison interrupted him with icy authority. "You have just made the most serious mistake of your career. You're talking about one of the most decorated operators in American military history. An officer handed classified documents to Judge Richardson, whose eyes widened as he read. "My God," he muttered. "Commander Alexander Washington," the general continued. "Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star. 7 successful missions in hostile territory. Counterterrorism expert who has saved more American lives than you will ever know." Hayes tried to protest, but she refused to identify herself because she was on a classified mission. "You idiot." The general did not hide her contempt. Operation Deep Cover to identify intelligence leaks in local agencies. "And congratulations, Officer Hayes. You passed the test with flying colors." Sarah Chin dropped her tablet. Her terrorist exclusive had just turned into the biggest journalistic embarrassment of her career. Every prejudiced word, every poisonous insinuation, every attempt to turn a national hero into a villain has been recorded and documented, the general continued. Commander Washington was testing how local authorities would react to a black person with military equipment. The results were enlightening. Judge Richardson rose respectfully. "General, I offer my sincerest apologies." "Your apologies are accepted, Your Honor. You followed protocol, but there are others here who turned prejudice into a political spectacle." Hayes felt his destruction approaching like a tsunami. "I didn't know. I was just following. You were following your basest instincts." The general cut him off. "You saw a black woman and immediately assumed criminality. You saw military equipment and fabricated terrorist narratives. You turned heroism into villain for personal gain." Alexis was finally brought in from the jail, now without handcuffs. Her demeanor had completely changed. Her shoulders squared, her chin up, her eyes shining with the authority of someone who had faced real battlefields. "Commander Washington," the general addressed her formally. "I deeply regret the treatment you received. Your sacrifice on behalf of this operation has not gone unnoticed." "Thank you, General." Mission accomplished. Hayes watched in horror as cameras captured every moment of her humiliation. The same cameras he had called in for his political glory now recorded her complete destruction. Robert Mills approached the commander with tears in his eyes. "I knew there was something special about you. Thank you for your service." "Thank you for yours, veteran." The general turned to the press. "Let me be clear. Commander Washington is an American hero. Anyone who used her arrest for political gain or journalistic sensationalism will face the appropriate consequences." Sarah Chun could already see her career crumbling. Hayes knew that his political ambition had died in that moment, buried under the weight of his own exposed prejudice. What Hayes couldn't imagine was that his thirst for the spotlight had illuminated the very thing he wanted to keep hidden, his own prejudices. And when you try to destroy someone who has dedicated their life to protecting the country you claim to love, justice has a very poetic way of exacting the price of hypocrisy. 6 months later, Hayes was cleaning tables at the fast food restaurant where he got a job after his ignominious dismissal. No law firm in the area would hire him after videos of his public humiliation went viral on social media. "Table 3 needs to be cleared," shouted the manager, a 22-year-old who treated the former prosecutor like any other inexperienced employee. Sarah Chun was now freelancing, writing articles about gardening for local blogs. No reputable outlet would hire her after she had fabricated one of the biggest fake news stories of the decade. Her dreams of investigative journalism had died along with her credibility. Meanwhile, Commander Washington had been promoted to colonel and assigned to lead a new military training program that identified and eliminated systemic bias in the armed forces. Her first lecture would be broadcast nationally. "Prejudice isn't just morally wrong," she said before an audience of 500 senior officers. "It's tactically stupid. When you underestimate someone based on the color of their skin, their gender, or their social background, you make yourself vulnerable in ways you can't even imagine." Robert Mills watched from the front row, proud that he had been the first to recognize what everyone else had missed. Dr. Martinez, now a military lawyer, took furious notes. Every word the colonel said would become part of his new defense protocols. You saw Hayes trying to turn heroism into terrorism, simply because he couldn't accept that a black woman could be more qualified than he was. Colonel Washington continued, "That wasn't just a moral failing. It was a strategic failure that compromised a national security operation." In the audience, generals nodded gravely. The story of the Washington case was already being studied in military minds as an example of how prejudice can compromise critical missions. Hayes, watching the broadcast in the small apartment he now shared with 2 coworkers, turned off the television in anger. His ex-wife had divorced him 3 months after the scandal, taking their children and half his assets. His political dreams were now a cruel joke among former colleagues. Sarah Chun closed her laptop after reading the devastating comments on her latest article on 10 tips for winter gardening. Readers still recognized her and remembered her terrorist exclusive that turned into a national embarrassment. The difference between a hero and a villain, Colonel Washington concluded her lecture, is often not in the actions, but in the perspective of the storyteller. Hayes tried to make me the villain because he couldn't accept that I was the hero. The auditorium erupted in applause. 3 universities had already offered her honorary professorships for when she retired from active duty. 2 publishers were vying for the rights to her autobiography. That night at the restaurant, Hayes burned his hand on the fryer because he wasn't paying attention. "Careful man," warned a teenage colleague. "Concentration is everything in this job." Hayes looked at her hands. Once accustomed to flipping through million-dollar contracts and shaking hands with influential politicians, now they smelled of frying oil and cheap detergent. Colonel Washington slept peacefully at her base, dreaming of new missions that would save American lives. Her medals gleamed silently on her nightstand, tangible reminders of a life dedicated to protecting people who would never know her name. "Do you know the difference between revenge and justice?" she had asked a young officer at the end of the lecture. "Revenge is personal. Justice is turning your pain into protection for others." Hayes had learned the hard way that when you try to destroy someone who dedicates their life to protecting others, it's not just one person you're attacking. It's a symbol. And symbols, when attacked unjustly, become stronger. The real victory wasn't seeing Hayes cleaning tables or Sarah Chun writing about plants. Colonel Washington reflected months later. It was in every young black service member who now knew they could serve without hiding their excellence, for fear of being misinterpreted. 3 years later, the program Colonel Washington created had reduced cases of military discrimination by 70%. Hayes still cleaned tables, but now without the bitterness. He had finally learned that prejudice hurts most those who carry it. Sarah Chun eventually found redemption by writing a book about responsible journalism, using her own downfall as a case study on how prejudices destroy careers and lives. If this story of transformation and justice has touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories about how true strength doesn't come from tearing others down, but from lifting yourself up so high that your haters have to break their necks to try to reach you.